Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to both the witnesses for being here and for your excellent testimony. Deeply appreciated your remarks. And you both touched on the concern when duties to warn are issued about the lack of protection following that. Can you both go into some detail of what that experience is like? And if you could choose, what would you want to see from police and others for additional protections or the like? Mr. Moninder Singh, would you like to start?
Yeah, definitely. I can speak with experience with multiple duties to warn issued against me. I would think that one of the problems we see is that there is very little information of where the threat is coming from, so you're not really know what to look out for. There's very little resources that are provided when it comes to direction as to what how you can safeguard yourself. There's simple things like get a security camera, be aware of your surroundings. But when you have somebody that's telling you from law enforcement that you have an imminent threat of assassination against your life, those things are not things that are going to protect anyone living in Canada. As we saw in the case of my friend, Mr. Nidger, who also received the same warning with me in July of 2022. What we'd like to see is actually going deeper. Why does this risk persist in the first place? We feel like an inquiry to actually understand India is what's needed first. The safeguarding is really just putting Band-Aids on a bleeding wound that won't stop right now with what India is doing. So an inquiry will go deep enough into the situation to understand how deeply India has penetrated into Canada, where in our electoral systems, where in our academia, where in our media, and where in our politics they're interfering. And I think that's the only way to understand them and then to be able to counter them. I think the rest of it is really Band-Aid solutions. The law enforcement agencies don't have the ability to put cars in front of people's homes 24/7. I have 2 years of duty to warns that are still persisting. To expect the Canadian government, the law enforcement agencies to station multiple officers with me at all times is just not feasible for this country. And it shouldn't have to happen. So I think we go to the root of the problem versus the Band-Aid solutions that will just maybe keep people safe for the time being, but it's not getting to the actual cause of the whole situation, which is India.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. And Mr. Balpreet Singh, do you have anything to add to that?
I'll just briefly add that I've spoken to a number of people that have received these duties to warn. You are visited by law enforcement. You are given a piece of paper to read, which is then taken back. You are then not told what the source of that threat is. You are not given any real resources to protect yourself. You are told that you must, change your routines and take precautions, but what those precautions and changes to routines would look like is not clear. These people feel abandoned, they feel a little bit helpless, and they feel stigmatized. If this information goes out into the community, they don't want other people to know necessarily, because then they won't feel safe being around in those same spaces. So it's a very unsatisfactory process. I'm not sure how much it actually helps.
Thank you for that. Mr. Moninder Singh, am I pronouncing your first name correct, sir? Thank you. Mr. Moninder Singh, you mentioned your family and the impact on your family. I can, just as outlined just now by Mr. Balpreet Singh, just the steps, and I can't imagine just being at home and getting a knock at the door to that and then kind of being left to your own devices, especially when you have children and a spouse at home. Can you just go into a bit more detail of the impact that has? And I appreciate what you're saying to get to the root of the cause, I agree, but imminently, are there any things that could be taken, particularly given this is at a very heightened moment? Any comments you have?
The reality becomes that your whole life changes. Coming into rooms like this, you start thinking as to if, where's the safety here? If it's an imminent threat of assassination, as law enforcement and its highest level of national security through the Inside Division that's what they're telling us, then me coming here, am I putting people in this room at risk? Can I go to my kids' schools? Can I go to their practices, their recitals, their games? And it may feel like these are minor things until they happen to you, but your whole life flips upside down when things like that. And you don't want to be around people. The reality of the situation is that you want to protect people around you, especially those people you care about, and even those that you don't know, probably even more, because they have nothing to do with this. So we're thrust into this situation. I think in the immediate sense, what we saw with Mr. Nidger was he changed his routines. He did everything he could. He did everything that you could possibly do to try to protect yourself in that situation. The only thing he didn't do, which none of us will do, is go silent. And I think if we don't go silent, they're going to keep coming. So I don't believe there's anything aside from like a personal security detail that would be provided to individuals at a very extreme cost, I think, to our country as well. I think there's nothing that would really keep people safe from my 2 years of experience now.
Thank you. Do you feel that anything more should be done to hold people accountable that are responsible for this?
I think, again, I would go back to the inquiry, as in, to understand who's actually accountable. We've heard everyone from Mr. Modi to Amit Shah through David Morrison earlier this week, naming that the highest levels of Indian, authorities are involved. So I think we definitely do. One of the things I mentioned at the end was that diplomatic sanctions against Indian intelligence officials and their diplomats that have already been expelled from this country, those would help for sure. But I think ultimately we have to figure out what's going on here, as in what's going on in our backyard and how deeply India has penetrated here. I think those are the only ways to keep all Canadians safe, because this actually went way beyond just a focus group of individuals. It spread out to violence in public. It spread out to business owners. It spread out to members of the Sikh community, but also the broader South Asian community. And it could go wider than that if it's not checked. There's no reason why extortion wouldn't then just go to all Canadians if we let gangs from India come into this country and operate at the behest of the Indian government.
Thank you, Ms. Nacho. Go now to Mr. Chahal. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today and listening to your opening remarks. Thank you for your bravery and what you're still doing. My first question is for both of you gentlemen, please. We know that Canada has seen a drastic rise in extortions attempts, particularly targeting the South Asian community in Ontario, BC, and Alberta. Can you explain to the committee the nature of these extortion attempts, and can you provide some examples of how these attempts play out and the tactics that are used to intimidate individuals in your communities?
Just by saying that primarily targeting the Sikh community and the Punjabi community versus the South Asian community at large. So I would like to point that out. The second part of that is how it actually plays out. What we've seen in multiple kind of reports that have come out is that India is using these nexus of gangs, individuals that might even be in prison in India that have been given free-for-all to kind of go out and extort people out here. Now, that extortion happens when people have entered this country and they've started into criminal activity, or they came here with the intention of conducting criminal activity. And those people then organize. They're coordinated through Indian proxies and middle persons that are within the communities and the areas that you've set out. And they're being coordinated through both the Indian consulate offices in Canada and along with their gang nexus as well. So when they go to somebody as a business person and they say, give us $300,000 or we're going to get you, we're going to kill you, we're going to do this to you, they burn down a townhouse complex they're building. They burn down a house they're building as business people. They shoot up their home where they have their family and their kids at home. And people have been known to give extraordinary amounts of money in the millions of dollars to try to protect themselves. They're afraid of going to law enforcement because they've been told not to. And I think that speaks to the fact that they don't think they're safe. So I think that's a very brief way of kind of putting it to your question as to how the whole thing operates. But it's a very elaborate way of India, their Indian consulates, their diplomats that have been expelled, and a nexus of gangs and individuals they brought over here to do their dirty work for them.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Balpreet Singh, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I've got a couple of things. So the extortion comes in two different forms. One is a smaller level. It's not about money. It's about behavior. So getting documents signed by individuals saying that they believe in, the unity, integrity of India, and then threatening them that they would make that public, or making other statements that they've signed public. That's one way of forcing people, or saying that you won't get a visa or your family might be threatened. All of this is a smaller level of extortion, but the game plan for the multi-million-dollar type of extortion is to paint Canada as a unsafe country, to further a narrative. And in that situation, we're seeing businesses being asked for amounts that they simply can't pay. And the real purpose is to strike terror. And like I said, in June 2022, I had pointed out that this gang war narrative might be used to target Sikhs, because that's what happens. The Indian media and state put out these narratives, and then they create the events on the ground to support those narratives. So that's what we're seeing here, that Canada is unsafe. It's overrun by Khalistani extremists and gangs and Punjabi gangs, and they make that a reality.
Thank you for those answers. Obviously, we're hearing a situation where there's got to be great fear in your community over these situations and these extortion attempts, and not just all our attempts. Some of them are successful, unfortunately. A while ago, our Conservative colleague Tim Uppel brought forward a private member's bill to try to help address this issue and to address the dramatic rise in extortion offences. And in this private member's bill, there was going to be parts to establish mandatory minimum penalties for the offence of extortion, establish a mandatory minimum penalty for the extortion to capture all instances of extortion committed for the benefit of, at the direction of, or in association with a criminal organization. It was also to restore the mandatory minimum penalty of 4 years for the offence of extortion with a non-restricted firearm, and also to establish arson. And earlier you mentioned there was some definitely arson.
Mr. Shipley, could you wrap it up? Good.
I'm only at 4 minutes 30 seconds, so I think I've.
Okay. Our timing is a little off here.
So sorry about that. I was just about through to my end there. And our last point was to establish arson as an aggravating factor for the charge of extortion. You had mentioned definitely arson as part of this extortion. This was voted against by both the Liberals and the NDP, as was put forward by our Conservative colleague Tim Uppel. Do you not think having harsher penalties would make your community feel a little safer in these instances? I know we're almost out of time, so maybe I'll just go to Mr. Balpreet Singh and ask for his comments on it.
To be honest, I'm not completely familiar with the motion. I mean, in theory, I think it's absolutely true that there need to be penalties for this sort of behavior. And one of the things that was mentioned before, why is Canada a soft target? The reason is that you can engage in espionage here. You can pass names on, video on, surveil people, and there's no penalties for it. Now, Germany has tried Indian agents, and that has had, I believe, a chilling effect. But here in Canada, there are absolutely no consequences to the type of behavior India is engaging in.
Thank you, Mr. Shipley. We go now to Mr. Gahir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you again to the witness testimony. Mr. Moninder Singh, I wanted to ask you a bit more. You talked a lot about the duty to warn. When did you start receiving these? You said you received multiple. Can you share a time frame of when these started happening?
The first ones were in July of 2022. It was approximately a few days after Mr. Ripudaman Singh Malik was killed in Surrey, BC. Myself, Mr. Nijjar, 3 others in Surrey were immediately given duty to warns within days. One of the reasons those duty to warns may have popped up, which is much more apparent now, is that multiple Indian newspaper media outlets had published our names as individuals that may have been involved in the murder of Mr. Malik, which is absolutely just BS at the end of the day. And but they wanted to show that there was a row in the community. And after Mr. Nijjar's death, I received my second duty to warn. And that was actually also broadcast in the media that it was supporters of Mr. Malik that may have killed Mr. Nijjar. And this is the way that they wanted to run this whole operation, is that they wanted to show that this was an inter-community battle. They were wanting to remove Sikh leadership from this country. And then they had multiple other threats, which after the indictment in the U.S. opened up, was very clear that it wasn't just going to be limited to Mr. Nijjar, Mr. Pannu, and others. It was going to be a whole bunch of other Sikh leadership in Canada, especially, that was going to be eliminated. So those duty to warns came like in multiple forms. I've had regular kind of conversations with law enforcement, with INSET, with CSIS around concerns within the community and potentially concerns they may have with me and my moving around the way I do. So I think that you get the duty to warns, and for me it was at very interesting times. It was after the murder of 2 Sikhs in Canada that I received both of those warnings, and they're continuing till now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. I appreciate your perspective, your experience, and that you shared it. You mentioned the U.S. indictment. The Americans were able to thwart the murder, and with that indictment, I'm wondering if you feel that there are things that the Americans did to prevent the murder that we could be doing moving forward to ensure that more Mr. Nijjars, for example, are not murdered. I take issue with the fact that we weren't able to stop those murders from happening from a foreign government. Our party obviously cares very deeply about this country, and foreign interference is a serious issue that is deeply assaulting to all of us. And to see it from India to get to such an extent that individuals are being murdered in Canada is completely unacceptable. So it is frustrating as a Canadian to see that another country was able to stop murders and ours was not. Do you have any feedback of what we could be doing better so that we can stop future ones? And I appreciate that the recent announcement addressed 13 individuals who were in peril, and so our hope is that those individuals are no longer in peril, but we're not sure if that is the case. So any further information you can provide in your perspective would be welcome.
I think the way the United States is set up with their interests first, taking care of their country, their citizens, I think that's something that we don't understand where, as citizens of this country, where our interests are right now. As Balpreet Singh stated, is it with the human rights and right to life and freedoms that we have in this country, or is it with keeping India as a strong partner? And that is something that only this Foreign Interference Commission, this study, and other actions that the government will take in the coming months will actually show us as to where do they put Canadian lives versus relationship with India. Treating India with padded gloves versus framing Russia and China as hostile actors. I don't believe we have seen the same level of violence inflicted upon Canada and Canadians that India has done. So I think right now, before when I mentioned that action is going to speak, and I think an inquiry, I will keep coming back to that because we don't understand the enemy. We don't understand what they've done here, and we don't understand how deeply they've been infiltrated. And without knowing that, in a very, very strong sense, remove activities, like Mr. McGregor mentioned, they'll just continue. And we'll keep putting on Band-Aid solutions, and we won't actually protect Canadians.
Thank you, Ms. Dancho. We go with 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Professor Granger and Dr. Work. I appreciate having you both here and your expertise. Dr. Work, I was really interested with your opening comments. We've just got so many questions to ask, and maybe I'll get to ask them another time or after this. I gather your expertise is wide-ranging when it comes to foreign interference, and we're obviously talking about interference from India here, but I'm wondering, when we talk about what one country does, and you've alluded to this perhaps obliquely, maybe more directly at other times, about how countries like India, when they engage in foreign interference, that they look at the treatment of other countries. In other words, how does Canada respond to foreign interference from other countries? Now, it's quite clear that Beijing has interfered in prior elections. Now, what message, in your view, is sent based on how Canada has dealt with foreign interference from Beijing in relation to how India is now attempting to, obviously carry out violence, murders, extortion? I hope I'm being clear on my question.
Thank you, sir. It's a good question, and I would approach it in this way, that let's say when a foreign country, authoritarian state like China, Russia, increasingly India, engages in foreign interference, they do so by attempting to understand their target on, if you like, two different levels. On a political level, I mean, how well can we operate politically within that country in terms of engaging with target audiences in that country? What is the state of our diaspora in that country? To what extent can we encourage them to form and hold opinions that are favorable to our official policy? So there's that political level. There's a different level in terms of foreign states like those countries trying to understand, well, what kind of resistance are we going to meet by security and intelligence agencies in those foreign countries that we're targeting. They may be able to come to a picture of that kind of political environment that they're operating in. I would suggest to you, sir, that one of the challenges for many authoritarian states, no matter what the size of their intelligence arms might be, one of the challenges is really understanding the operating environment abroad. What are they going to hit when they try and conduct operations in Canada, US, UK, Europe, and so on? And they will often engage in those operations with a degree of ignorance about their opposition, what they're going to face, and a degree of overconfidence about what they can achieve. It's because we're in the secret world now and knowing, how to understand the success of foreign interference operations. But I think one of the blind spots of many authoritarian states is that they come at foreign interference with a picture of the politics of a foreign target, which may not be very accurate. And they often come at intelligence and security operations related to foreign interference without a full understanding of what they're going to meet in terms of security pushback. And so I think my view, and I appreciate that this has been a contested issue, including throughout the public inquiry into foreign interference. My view that Canada should be seen as some kind of playground for foreign interference. My own view personally is that that's an exaggerated position. But again, I would separate it between what foreign states think about Canada as a playground politically and what they think about Canada as a playground in terms of security intelligence capabilities. And I think there are two different calculations there. Perhaps an easier target politically, harder target in terms of operations on the ground.
When I see what
Thank you, Mr. Caputo.
For being here. I have to say how dismayed I am once again on our second day of testimony here. We just had, I think, really powerful testimony from two members of the community in our last hour speaking about personal threats to themselves. Mr. Moninder Singh spoke about some of the last words spoken from Mr. Najjar. And the Conservatives asked in their first round if Canada is getting brushed off by India in meetings. Do you think the Sikh community experiencing threats against their life care that Canada and the Modi government brushed off some of those meetings? Or perhaps if we cowered to that pressure, like Stephen Harper, who condemned Canadians' rights for free speech, who promoted Sikh separatism, he got those meetings. Andrew Scheer got those meetings. Do you think that Canadians care about the brushing off of meetings over the safety of members of our community's lives? Like, let's seriously think about this. And Mr. Caputo, in his round of questions on a study about foreign interference of India, asked about China. I wonder how the Sikh community feels after that powerful testimony just not even an hour ago about threats to life in our country. And Mr. Caputo asked about China. Ms. Dancho asked about brushing off of meetings. Perhaps we should be asking about how the Indian government has used agents to threaten the lives of Canadian citizens. Perhaps that should be a priority in the limited time that we have in these meetings. So to our two witnesses, do you think that it provides Canadians a sense of safety and security, whether or not the Modi government likes us enough to have those meetings? Or is it better for Canada to initiate Canadian policy and take a Canadian stance that protects our citizens?
I'm happy to go first in response to that question, and through you, Chair, I would say two things. I can't speak, of course, on behalf of the Sikh community. I would say that I would hope that the Sikh community would take considerable comfort from some of the revelations about the details of Canadian diplomatic and national security efforts in terms of trying to convince the Indian government to cease its covert operations in Canada. And we have learned a great deal about that. All the members of this committee have learned an extraordinary amount about that in terms of the testimony you got a couple of days ago. We've learned more about it in the foreign interference inquiry from the RCMP press conference on Thanksgiving Day. I think there are some demonstrations there that are important, not just to the Sikh community, but to Canadians as a whole, to see their government taking action diplomatically, strong action diplomatically, and taking action on the national security front. And the question of Canadian officials being brushed off should be taken seriously in the sense that Canadian officials, at the end of the day, created a policy around responding to being brushed off that was designed to try and bring a stop to these Indian covert activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connell. We'll go now to, on y va maintenant, Madame Michaud.